Hello, I'm Dan Scott, and I want to talk to you about change. I have just finished writing a book on the great changes that have been taking place in our nation and the world in the last few decades, and especially in the last decade. We've experienced global disruptions of all kinds, technological, social upheaval, uh, political change, and we've all had to deal with it. And it's brought trauma to us, whether we think of ourselves as on the left or the right or the middle. We are disturbed by it. I've been a Christian pastor for all my adult life, and for a good part of my adult life, I've also been a mental health worker. And I can tell you that people, regardless of political or religious affiliation, they are upset by these changes, and we all have to deal with them. Not everybody goes to a therapist or a pastor to talk about these changes and how they're dealing with them, but when someone does, we always notice that when they know they're in a safe place, out comes this kind of longing, wishing that they could find a new place of stability. Some people want to go back and recover life as they imagine that it used to be. But a lot of people are willing to change if the change would only stop. But change isn't going to stop. Change is going to continue. In 1967 or 8, there was a great book written called Future Shock by Alan Toffler. That book was so prophetic about what was going to occur in the world. And he starts off talking about um, uh, changes people used to make when they would live abroad. And I related to that because my family's from southern West Virginia originally, but when I was a teenager, my parents moved to South America. So I had to learn a new language, eat new foods, and in those days there was no internet, and it would be years before one would return home. And though I did visit from time to time to the U.S., I would not live again in the United States until my early 30s for any appreciable amount of time. So I'd lived abroad in different Latin American countries and in Quebec and French-speaking Canada. And so I knew what he was talking about. At first, it's exciting. You're there for a few weeks, and it's like, wow, you're tasting different foods, you are encountering a different culture. It's really, really exciting. And then it's not so exciting. After a while, you feel like a kind of a dummy, and other people in that country that you're visiting start looking at you like, when are you going to go home? So, in every country, there's people that do not like folks coming from outside to live in their country. So you have to adjust to that as well and discover the people that are welcoming you. And then they're going to laugh at the mistakes you make in language, because everybody learning a new language makes kind of mistakes that sound funny to the people that speak it all the time since they've been children. And when you learn this new language, it changes you, because as you're speaking a new language, you kind of feel like a different person. And in my case, I came back to the United States in my 30s, and people expected me to be fully American, which I am. My parents' lineage going way back before the Revolution. I speak English with a certain accent, and that tells people that I was born here, but inside, for several decades, there was something significantly different occurring in my life. Change changed me. So anyway, Toffler said that soon everybody would experience these kinds of changes, even if they never left their hometown, because the entire world was going to shrink. He didn't even know about the internet at that time. He was just thinking about global travel and people moving here and there. And he said change is going to come at us so quickly that we will be making changes as though we had moved to another country, first every 10 years, and then every 5 years, then every 2.5 years, and then it will be continual. And of course, now we're in those kind of cycles, and it makes people distressed, makes people angry, it makes people sad. Sometimes people take their lives. So I thought, well, I'm going to go on to the internet and I'm going to do a few sessions on change. And here's what we need to know about change. One, change is inevitable, and it comes in two different categories. Changes that you didn't intend to make, that someone else made for you, can be good or bad, but you've got to adjust to it. There's a new president in the country, and you got to adjust to it, whether you like that person or don't like that person. Your church changes that you go to, and you either find it comfortable or not comfortable, and that changes you. But changes are inevitable. One of the changes that's inevitable for me is aging. Of course, it's for everybody, but when I look in the mirror, I see someone different than the person that I think of in my head, about 15 years younger than what I see in the mirror. And then the photographs come, and for a long time I just blamed the photographer. I thought, well, bad photographer, bad lighting. No, I'm changing. I am that older person, and I look in the mirror, and I sometimes see my dad, but actually my dad doesn't look that much older than me. He's got a youthful appearance. He was blessed with that. Sometimes I see my grandfather peering out, and then I think, gosh, when I related to my grandfather, he was younger than I am now. Goodness, that's not always that comfortable. So we have to know how to adjust so we don't shut down with change. Here's another thing. It's inevitable. And the second thing is adjustment to change changes you. And you can find a lottery ticket on your way to walking around your neighborhood and find out it's the winning numbers, and you think that'd be great, but you don't know. You don't know until you're actually in those changes, how they're going to affect your life, how people are going to look at you differently, and whether you find that good or bad. In my work as a pastor and also as a therapist, I've often encountered people who find successful change difficult to take. It makes them feel like they're a different person than they ever intended to be, for example. So change comes at us in so many different directions. I was writing down a few things. I thought about what happens when your children marry someone. You may like that person, you may not like that person, but you're going to have to learn how to relate to somebody in an intimate way that you never really had thought about before. And maybe in your family background, in-laws like that are always treated like they're guests for their entire life. They're not really the real thing, they're not one of your children. But if you come from a family like I did, that you make your in-laws your children, you don't know if they're going to respond in kind. That person may not have that in their background. Pardon me. And so adjustment to change changes you. My website is going to be called Abba Dan, because my children call me Abba, my grandchildren. And I was well along in life, and no one had ever called me Abba before, but now I have these little ones that call me Abba, and so somebody says Abba, I look around to see if they're talking to me. It's a new title for me. It's a new identity for me. Now, not that new, it's been 20 years almost, but it was at one time. And it's changed me as I leaned into that identity. The final thing about change is, as I continue to change, will I remain myself? And the answer is yes, you will, but your personality takes on new layers as you go along. Even those changes that you make that you like, that you get an education, for example, and suddenly people are responding to in a professional way that is a new part of your identity, and And that changes the way you look at yourself. This allergy season, and so I'm adjusting to change of knowing that I'm not going to be that smooth operator in front of a camera. I'm going to be coughing while I talk to someone about maintaining mental health, and they'll wonder, is the guy that's making the presentation of good health? We all have those kinds of thoughts about ourselves. And in adjusting to change, it's often about how do I make these adjustments and still be myself when all is said and done. Well, this is the first of a series I'm going to do, and I hope you'll follow along. And if you found us somewhere on the web, I would love to interact with you. And please make a connection, and we'll stay in touch. And as time goes on, we'll have more content here, written content as well as video content that you can follow along. And my prayer is that it will be a blessing to you and help you as you, like all of us, cope with the changes in your life.